My husband divorced me when I was 68, took my $5 million house, and said, "You don't deserve any of it." Then my daughter stood on his side telling me I should stay quiet and accept everything. In their eyes, I was just an old woman with nothing left to fight for. But they were wrong. And the price of that mistake came much sooner than they ever expected. Thank you for being here and spending your time with this story. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let me know which city or country you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing our community from around the world. Just a small note, parts of this story include a few fictional elements added for storytelling and learning purposes, and any similarities to real people or places are purely coincidental. I'm Eleanor. I was married to Robert Mitchell for 48 years, long enough to believe I knew him to trust him with everything. I was the one who managed our finances, tracked every expense, built our retirement fund. I thought nothing got past me. How wrong I was. When the divorce papers arrived, I discovered what he'd really been doing. Hidden accounts, secret transfers, calculated betrayal. I had a choice: accept humiliation and disappear quietly, or fight back. I chose to fight. After 2 years of legal warfare, I won. But winning came at a cost I'm still calculating. Was it worth it? Sitting in my Florida house 2 years later, I honestly don't know. The money's mine. The truth came out. My daughter and I are speaking again. And Robert isn't here to face any of it. That's the version most people know. But the real story, why I couldn't just walk away, starts much earlier. It starts with the tiny cracks I convinced myself weren't there. 18 months before Robert filed for divorce, small things began to shift. Details you notice but dismiss. The kind that nag at 3 in the morning but seem silly in daylight. It was April in Connecticut. The dogwoods along our street were blooming. I was reviewing credit card statements like I did every month. Robert's card showed a billing address I didn't recognize. Not our home on Burwood Lane, a law office downtown. I asked him at dinner. He didn't look up. Estate planning stuff. Nothing to worry about. So I didn't worry. Not then. Weeks later, the laptop thing started. Robert had never been security conscious. He'd leave his computer, open email visible. But suddenly he was closing it when I entered rooms, angling the screen. He set up a password, something he'd always said was too much trouble. "Identity theft's getting worse," he explained. Just being smart. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Then came the perfume. Not mine. I'd worn Chanel No. 5 since our wedding. This was different. Lighter, younger, floral. I smelled it on his collar one Saturday after tennis. Then again, 2 weeks later. Then a third time. "The club switched laundry services," he said when I mentioned it. "New fabric softener." 3 little explanations. 3 reasonable answers. I wanted them true, so I accepted them. December brought the Christmas card. We'd always been traditional about holidays. That year, sorting mail, I found one addressed to Robert. No return address. Inside, no printed message, no signature. Just 2 words, "Merry Christmas." And below it, 1 letter K. I stood by the mailbox in the December cold breath, making clouds. Something in my stomach twisted. When I showed Robert, he barely glanced at it. "Karen from my old office. She always sends cards." His voice was flat, practiced, rehearsed. I told myself I was paranoid. We were in our late 60s. People changed. Marriages went through phases. The alternative that something was genuinely wrong was too terrifying. But one moment I couldn't explain away. Late January, maybe a year before everything fell apart. I turned to ask Robert something mundane. What he wanted for dinner, probably. He was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen in 47 years. Cold, distant, calculating. Like I was a stranger, he was assessing. What I said, "Nothing." The expression vanished. The familiar smile appeared. But I'd seen it. That look. Something cold settled in my chest. I didn't know that, while I convinced myself everything was fine, Robert was meeting with attorneys, planning how to hide our assets, emailing about keeping the house outside the marital estate, that the perfume belonged to Victoria Hayes and Kay was Catherine, her middle name, that the law office wasn't about estate planning, it was preparation for war. I didn't know the confrontation was weeks away, that my life would shatter, that I'd have to choose between dignity and survival. But looking back now, all the signs were there. I just wasn't ready to see them yet. I confronted Robert on a Tuesday morning in May. The dogwoods had dropped their petals. I'd rehearsed what I'd say, but my voice came out smaller than intended. The perfume, the Christmas card, the law office address. "Robert, what's going on?" He looked up from his coffee. For a moment, something flickered across his face. guilt maybe, or calculation. Then it was gone. "You're being paranoid, Eleanor," he said, calm, almost kind. "We're getting old. You're imagining things." "I'm not imagining the card signed K. Karen from accounting, I told you. And the perfume, the laundry service." We both knew we hadn't really addressed this. I opened my mouth to push harder. Before I could, Robert set down his mug. "I want a divorce," he said. The words didn't make sense. They hung in the air like something foreign, something that belonged in someone else's kitchen. "What?" "I want a divorce. I don't love you anymore, Eleanor. Haven't for a long time." My legs went weak. I gripped the counter. "Robert, we've been married 48 years. There's nothing to work through. It's over. My attorney will contact you." His attorney, he already had one. He walked out. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, the bedroom door closing. I stood there alone, trying to understand how my life had just ended over morning coffee. 2 days later, papers arrived. Divorce petition filed May 9th. That was before our conversation. Before I'd confronted him about anything. He'd planned this. The confrontation I thought I was initiating, he'd been ready for it. I called my college roommate's son for a referral. He gave me a name, Gerald Porter, older gentleman, family law for 30 years. I met him that week. Gerald's office smelled like old books and furniture polish. He was kind, grandfatherly. He listened, took careful notes. When I finished, he nodded. "We'll fight this, Mrs. Mitchell, don't worry." But something in his voice, a softness, made me worry more. Discovery began in June. That's what Gerald called it. What we found felt like landmines. Robert had transferred our house, the home we'd bought in 1985, where Sarah took her first steps into a limited liability company, an LLC, Burwood Holdings, registered in Delaware. "When?" I asked. Gerald checked paperwork. March 14th. March 14th, less than 2 months before Robert filed for divorce. "Can he do that?" "It's complicated," Gerald said. "The house was marital property. Transferring it without your knowledge could be fraudulent conveyance. But proving that requires showing intent. We'd need evidence he did this specifically to hide assets. He did it 2 months before filing. Isn't that evidence?" Suggestive, but not conclusive. Not yet. Not yet. Those words would haunt me. The next blow came reviewing bank statements. Our joint savings, the one I'd been depositing into for decades, that should have had close to $200,000, had $18,000 left. $18,000. Where did it go? Gerald's finger traced lines. Transfers, past 12 months, to accounts in Robert's name only. My hands shook. I'd been managing our finances. How had I missed this? "He structured them carefully," Gerald said. "Small amounts, irregular timing, nothing that would trigger alerts. Systematic, calculated, planned." That evening, my phone rang. Sarah, my daughter, who I hadn't heard from in 2 weeks. "Mom," her voice was tight. "Dad told me you're making this difficult." "Sarah, just don't, okay? Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." The line went dead. I sat on the floor of my rented apartment because, yes, I'd already had to leave our house, the one Robert now claimed belonged to his LLC, and felt something crack inside me. My husband had stolen from me. My daughter had taken his side, and my attorney kept saying, "It's complicated." But the worst hadn't come yet. The first court hearing would crush me completely. The first hearing took place the following March. I was 69 by then. My birthday had passed somewhere in the blur of paperwork and sleepless nights. I sat in the courtroom on a hard wooden bench and felt like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Robert's attorney was everything Gerald wasn't. Younger, sharper, expensive suit. He stood before the judge with easy confidence. "Your Honor, Burwood Holdings, LLC was established as a separate business entity for legitimate estate planning. The property was transferred before any divorce proceedings. Under Delaware law, this constitutes a separate asset not subject to marital distribution." Gerald rose slowly, papers trembling in his hands. He was kind, but kindness wasn't enough. "Your Honor, the timing raises questions. The LLC was formed less than 2 months before." "Belief isn't evidence, counselor," the judge interrupted, older, probably near retirement, voice weary. "Do you have documentation proving fraudulent intent, communications, financial records, showing concealment?" Gerald hesitated. "We're still gathering." "Then you're not ready." Motion denied. 5 minutes. That's all it took. The judge ruled from the bench. Robert would retain the house valued at $5 million. I would receive $350,000 from remaining joint accounts. The house, our home of 40 years, belonged to Robert's LLC. I didn't cry. Not then. I sat still while the judge spoke, while Robert's attorney smiled, while Gerald gathered his shaking papers. I sat still while people filed out, while the courtroom emptied. But everything had changed. That house wasn't just $5 million. It was where I'd planted roses every spring for 40 years, where I'd refinished hardwood floors myself while Robert traveled, where Sarah took her first steps, where we'd measured her height against the kitchen door frame every birthday, the garden I'd grown from nothing, the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, Sarah's childhood room still painted the lavender she'd chosen at 12. Gone, all of it. My phone buzzed walking to the car. Sarah. Mom, I heard about the ruling. You should accept this and move forward. It's time. I stared at those words until they blurred. I drove to my rented apartment, a small one-bedroom that smelled like other people's cooking. I sat on the floor and finally cried. But a week later, something shifted. 3 a.m. Couldn't sleep. I made coffee, opened my laptop, started reviewing everything. All the documents, all the dates. I began writing a timeline. December, Robert consulting attorneys. January, email about keeping property outside marital estate. March 14th, LLC formed. May 9th, divorce filed. 8 weeks between the LLC and the divorce. I remembered the credit card statement in April law office address. That was between LLC formation and divorce filing. What was he planning then? I typed into Google post-judgment motion fraud. Pages of results appeared. Legal precedents. Cases where people successfully challenge settlements after discovering fraud. Fraudulent conveyance, the term Gerald had used but seemed too timid to pursue. I could appeal. If I had evidence, real evidence of Robert's intent, I could file a motion to set aside the judgment. I needed a different attorney, someone who specialized in this, someone who fought. At 6 a.m, I called my older sister Ruth. She'd been widowed 10 years earlier, lived alone in Vermont. Probably the only person I still fully trusted. Ellie. Her voice was rough but immediately alert. What's wrong? I told her everything. The ruling, the house, the devastation. Long silence when I finished. You're not alone, Ruth said finally, steel wrapped in warmth. You hear me? You are not alone. I'm coming down there. We're going to figure this out together. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. Not hope, exactly. Not yet, but the faint possibility of it. I didn't know that decision to keep fighting to find a better attorney would change everything. But first, I'd have to face the person who'd hurt me most, my daughter, Sarah. Sarah called on a May evening 2 months after the disastrous hearing. The phone rang just as the sun was setting. Mom? Her voice was different, hard. Sarah, honey, don't. You need to stop this. Whatever you think you're doing, dragging Dad back to court, you're hurting this family. I gripped the phone tighter. Hurting the family, Sarah, your father stole our house. He drained our accounts. That's not what Dad says. Then what does Dad say? Long silence. Then he told me the truth about why he really wanted the divorce. My stomach dropped. What truth? He said you've been seeing someone else, another man. That's why he filed. He has proof, Mom. Phone records, hotel receipts. The words hit like a physical blow. That's a lie. Sarah, that's complete. Is it because I saw the documents? Whatever he showed you was fake. Sarah, please, I don't know what to believe anymore. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't know who you are anymore, Mom. The woman I knew wouldn't tear apart our family over money. This isn't about money. This is about... The line went dead. I stood holding the phone, hands shaking. My daughter thought I was a liar, an adulterer, and Robert had planted every word. That was when I understood how calculated this was. The affair accusation wasn't random. It was strategic. Turn our daughter against me. Make me the villain. But while Sarah pulled away, someone else moved closer to the truth. Claire Davidson wasn't like Gerald. Where he'd been gentle and uncertain, she was precise and relentless. I'd found her through Ruth, a specialist in fraudulent asset cases known for winning battles everyone said were unwinnable. She was 43, sharp suits, spoke in clipped sentences. The first time we met, she looked me straight in the eye. I don't take cases I can't win. Tell me everything. By June, Claire had filed for supplemental discovery. The court approved it. That's when she started digging into Robert's emails. What she found changed everything. Eleanor, Claire's voice on the phone was controlled. I need you to come to my office, now. An hour later, I sat across from her desk while she turned her laptop toward me. This is an email from Robert to his attorney, dated January, 14 months before he filed for divorce. I leaned forward, reading the words. I need to structure this properly. The house has to be kept outside the marital estate. Can we establish an LLC for this purpose? I want everything in place before I file." My hands went cold. There it was, in his own words: intent, premeditation, planning. "There's more," Claire said. "He consulted 3 different attorneys starting in December. We have meeting notes, billing records. He was shopping for someone who'd help him hide assets." She laid out a timeline on paper. December initial attorney consultations, January email stating intent to hide property, March 14th, LLC formation, May 9th, divorce filing. I stared at the dates. So clear, so obvious. "This is our smoking gun," Claire said. "This proves fraudulent conveyance. We can file a post-judgment motion to set aside the original ruling." "We can win," I whispered. "We will win," Claire corrected. I should have felt triumphant. Part of me did. But mostly I felt sad. Deeply, achingly sad. This man I'd loved for 48 years. He hadn't just left me. He'd spent months plotting how to steal from me, had fabricated an affair to turn our daughter against me, had looked me in the eye and lied with such ease. Who was he? Had I ever really known him? Eleanor. Claire's voice pulled me back. "Are you ready to move forward?" I looked at the email on her screen, Robert's words cold and calculated. Then I thought of Sarah's voice, so convinced I was the villain. "Yes," I said. "File the motion." I didn't know then that before we could submit the paperwork, Sarah would show up at my apartment door, and that confrontation would leave the deepest wound of all. Sarah showed up on a September afternoon 3 weeks after Claire and I filed the motion. When I opened the door, her face was flushed, red eyes swollen. "Sarah?" She pushed past me without a word, no greeting, just walked into my living room and dropped a manila envelope on the coffee table. "Can you explain this?" Her voice shook. I picked up the envelope slowly. Inside, printed phone records with numbers highlighted in yellow, hotel receipts from Hartford, credit card statements showing restaurant charges, evidence supposedly of my affair. I stared at the documents, mind racing. The phone number highlighted wasn't mine. I checked twice. Similar, same area code, first 3 numbers, but the last 4 digits were different. The hotel receipt was dated March 12th. I pulled out my phone, opened my calendar. March 12th, I'd been at Ruth's in Vermont. 3 days. I had gas receipts, texts, photos. The credit card wasn't mine either. Wrong account number. The name partially redacted, but clearly not mine. "Sarah." I looked up. "These are fake. This isn't my phone number. Look." I showed her my phone. "See different numbers. And this hotel date I was with Aunt Ruth. I can prove it." "Stop." Sarah held up her hand. "Just stop, Mom." "But these documents are forged. Dad wouldn't do that." Her voice was absolute. "Dad has never lied to me. Not once. He's lying now to turn you against—" "No." She stepped back. "You're the one lying. About the money, the house, and now this. Making Dad the villain when you're the cheater." "I didn't cheat. Not once in 48 years. "Then why does he have proof?" "Because he fabricated it, Sarah." "Listen to yourself. You sound crazy." Her voice broke. "I came to give you one last chance." My chest tightened. "For what?" "Drop the appeal. Accept what the judge decided." She swallowed. "If you do, maybe we can fix this. Be a family again." "And if I don't?" Her eyes were cold. "Then I'm done. No more calls, no visits. You won't know your grandchildren." Her voice caught. "You'll lose me, Mom. For good." I looked at my daughter, my only child, and saw a stranger. "I love you," I said quietly, "more than anything. But I can't drop the case. Not because of money, because of truth. Your father committed fraud. Someday you'll see that. And when you do, I'll still be here." Sarah picked up the envelope, stared at it, then looked at me. "No," she said. "You won't." She walked out. The door slammed. I stood there listening to her footsteps fade. I sank to the floor, pulled my knees to my chest, sobbed. But even through the pain of losing my daughter, I didn't call Claire to withdraw. I couldn't. In October, Robert's attorney sent a settlement offer. Claire called me to her office. She slid a document across the desk. $900,000, substantially more than the original $350. In exchange, you sign a non-disparagement agreement. Never speak publicly about Robert or the case. I stared at the number. $900,000. Nearly 20% of the house's value. "It's a good offer," Claire said carefully. "With this, you could buy a nice home live comfortably. No more fighting, no more stress." I didn't answer. That night, I couldn't sleep. Sat at my kitchen table tea, going cold doing the math. $900,000. more money than I'd imagined having at once. But every time I started to convince myself, something pulled me back. The January email. I need to keep this property outside the marital estate. The LLC formation. March 14th, 2 months before filing. The systematic draining of accounts. The fake evidence to turn Sarah against me. 48 years. I'd given him 48 years. Managed our money, raised our daughter, built our home, stayed up with Sarah through fevers while Robert traveled, sacrificed career opportunities, trusted him with everything. He'd repaid me by plotting to steal it all. At 6 in the morning, I called Ruth. "Do you want the money?" she asked, "or do you want the truth?" I closed my eyes, thought of Sarah's face when she slammed the door, the lonely years ahead without my daughter, without grandchildren. Then I thought of that email, Robert's cold, calculated words. "I want the truth," I said. That afternoon, I told Claire to reject the offer. She filed the post-judgment motion formally. That decision led me into the longest, hardest battle of my life. But the war was just beginning, and the biggest revelations were still ahead. The injunction hearing took place in February. I'd turned 70 by then, another birthday passing in chaos of legal documents. The courtroom was smaller than before, but my heart pounded just as hard. This time, the judge was different. Judge Patricia Thornton was maybe 55 with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and silver hair in a tight bun. She had presence that made everyone sit straighter. When she entered, the room went silent. Claire stood to present. Unlike Gerald, she was precise and unwavering. "Your Honor, we're requesting a preliminary injunction preventing the defendant from selling or transferring the property at 428 Burwood Lane, pending resolution of our post-judgment motion." She pulled up the January email. This communication shows clear intent to hide marital assets. The defendant wrote, "I need to keep this property outside the marital estate." She laid out the timeline. December consultations, January email, March 14th LLC, May 9th divorce. Robert's attorney stood the same smooth man from before but seemed less confident. Judge Thornton studied the documents in silence. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Reed, your client formed an LLC 8 weeks before filing, transferred a $5 million marital asset. We have written evidence of intent to keep property outside the marital estate. How is this not fraudulent?" Reed fumbled through notes. Judge Thornton held up her hand. "I'll issue a temporary restraining order. The defendant is prohibited from selling, transferring, or encumbering the property at 428 Burwood Lane or assets associated with Burwood Holdings, LLC, until final adjudication. Motion granted." She banged her gavel. That was it. Claire and I walked out, and for the first time in almost a year, I could breathe. Not victory, not yet, but something. A small crack in Robert's armor. "That's a good judge," Claire said. "She sees through nonsense." That evening, Claire suggested something unexpected. "Eleanor, I know a support group. Women going through difficult divorces, many your age. I think it might help." I'd never been a support group person, but the loneliness was crushing. So I said yes. The following Tuesday, I walked into a church basement that smelled like coffee and old carpet. 8 women sat in a circle. They looked up and several smiled. Real smiles. Knowing smiles. A woman with steel gray hair stood and extended her hand. "I'm Dorothy. Welcome." Dorothy was 73, dressed in a cardigan and sensible shoes, with eyes that had seen things. She led the group naturally. After I introduced myself and shared basics, Dorothy nodded slowly. "I went through something similar," she said. "My husband tried hiding assets in his brother's name. Took 2 years to fight it. 2 years of people telling me to give up, accept what I got, and move on." She leaned forward. "But I didn't give up, and I won." "How did you keep going?" I asked. "Because I knew the truth. And once you know truth, you can't unknow it. You can't pretend lies are real because it's easier." She squeezed my hand. "Don't give up, honey. Truth wins. But you have to be strong enough to see it through." Over following weeks, that group became my lifeline. These women understood what I was going through. We weren't just sharing stories. We were surviving together. Then in late February, everything shifted again. I came home from grocery shopping to find a plain manila envelope under my apartment door. No return address, no postage, hand-delivered. I opened it standing in my kitchen, groceries still on counter. Inside was a bank statement. Not from any institution I recognized. Header read, Cayman International Bank. The account was under Coastal Properties LLC, a company name I'd never heard. The balance, $850,000. My hands shook. $850,000 in an offshore account under a different LLC. No note, no explanation, just the statement. I called Claire immediately. I just received something. You need to see this. 20 minutes later, she was at my apartment staring at the statement. Offshore account, Cayman Islands, where people hide money they don't want found. She looked up. Eleanor, this is huge. Who sent this? I don't know, no note. Someone slid it under my door. A bank employee with guilt, business associate with conscience. Claire shook her head. Or someone in Robert's circle who wants him to face consequences. Does it matter who? Not legally. What matters is its evidence. Real documented evidence of hidden assets. She pulled out her phone. I'm filing a supplement tonight. This changes everything. I sat at my kitchen table, still holding the statement. $850,000. Money that should have been marital assets. Money Robert hid while telling the court he'd been transparent. I'd lived with this man 48 years, shared a bed, raised a child, built a life, and never knew him at all. Eleanor. Claire's voice pulled me back. Are you okay? No, I said honestly. But I'm glad we found this. I wasn't ready for what Claire and the forensic accountant would discover next, because the fraud network Robert built was far more complex than either of us imagined. Between April and May, the forensic accountant Claire hired worked through every document we'd gathered. Bank statements, tax returns, corporate filings, email records. I'd never met him, but Claire assured me he was thorough. By late May, we received his report. 56 pages, single-spaced, with exhibits that added another 100 pages of supporting documentation. Claire called me to her office. Sit down, she said. You're going to need to. I sat. She slid the report across the desk. It's worse than we thought. Over the next 2 hours, Claire walked me through findings that made the offshore account seem almost simple by comparison. Robert had systematically transferred $1.2 million from our joint accounts to accounts in his name only, not all at once. Over 18 months. Small transfers, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, $20,000 occasionally. Irregular timing, nothing that would trigger automatic fraud alerts. But together, they added up to more than $1 million. Money I'd helped earn, money I'd helped save. Gone. How did I not see this? I asked, staring at the transfer logs. Because he was careful, Claire said. He knew you managed the accounts, so he structured transfers to look like normal bill payments. Utility companies, insurance, property maintenance. But the receiving accounts were his. That revelation hurt, but the next one was worse. Robert had purchased a second property, a condominium in Rhode Island, oceanfront, purchased 14 months before the divorce filing for $780,000. Not under his name. Under a third LLC, Harborview Holdings, that I'd never heard of. 3 LLCs, I said slowly. Burwood Holdings for the house. Coastal Properties for the offshore account. Harborview for a condo I didn't know existed. A shell game, Claire said. Moving assets around to make them disappear from marital distribution. But the final revelation was the one that made me physically ill. Victoria Hayes, 54 years old, married with 2 adult children, Robert's mistress. She wasn't just his lover, she was his co-conspirator. Victoria had co-signed the LLC formation documents for Harborview Holdings. Her name was on the offshore account paperwork. And according to bank records, she'd been receiving $8,000 per month labeled as consulting fees from accounts Robert had funded with our marital money. I stared at the bank statements showing payment after payment, $8,000 every month for 2 years. He paid her nearly $200,000, I said. My voice sounded far away. With our money. He was paying his mistress with money that was half mine. Claire nodded. The forensic accountant traced it all back. Every payment came from marital funds. She showed me copies of LLC formation documents with Victoria's signature next to Robert's, email chains between them discussing asset protection strategies and timing the transfers, messages about keeping Eleanor in the dark and making sure everything was properly structured before filing. They'd planned this together, plotted it. While I was home managing our household, believing we were partners, Robert and Victoria were constructing an elaborate scheme to steal from me. There's one more thing, Claire said. Her voice was carefully neutral. Something we discovered yesterday. She pulled up a document on her computer, an airline reservation. Robert Mitchell, One-way ticket, Hartford to San Jose, Costa Rica. Departure date, June 24th. I looked at the date. That's 1 week before our main hearing. Exactly. One way, departing from a small regional airport 90 minutes away where he'd be less likely to be noticed. Costa Rica, a country with no extradition treaty with the United States for civil matters. He was planning to run, I said. Yes. The room felt too small suddenly, too hot. Robert wasn't just hiding assets. He'd planned an escape. Walk away from everything, from responsibility, from consequences, from justice, and live off the money he'd stolen. What do we do? I asked. Claire was already pulling up a legal brief on her screen. Emergency motion to surrender passport. We file this morning. Judge Thornton will hear it this afternoon. 3 hours later, we were back in Judge Thornton's courtroom. She reviewed the airline reservation, the forensic report, the pattern of hidden assets. Motion to compel surrender of passport is granted, she said. Her voice was ice. Mr. Mitchell will deliver his passport to the court clerk by 5 p.m. today. Failure to comply will result in immediate contempt charges and a warrant for arrest. Robert's attorney, the smooth-talking Mr. Reed, looked genuinely rattled for the first time. Your Honor, this is extraordinary. Your client purchased a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country, scheduled 1 week before a hearing where he faces fraud allegations. What's extraordinary is that he thought he'd get away with it. Judge Thornton closed the file. 5 p.m., no extensions. We left the courthouse. I felt numb. He was really going to run, I said to Claire. Yes, the man I married, the father of my child. He was going to abandon everything and disappear. Claire put her hand on my shoulder. The man you married died a long time ago, Eleanor. Maybe he never existed at all. I thought about that all the way home. Who was Robert Mitchell? Had I ever really known him? The main hearing was now just 1 week away, and I was about to witness the man I'd once loved completely unravel before my eyes. If you're still here, comment "still here," so I know you're still with me. And tell me honestly, if you discovered everything I had just learned, would you walk away to keep the peace? Or step into that courtroom and fight for the truth? Note some details ahead are slightly adapted for storytelling and educational purposes only. June 20th arrived. I was 71 by then. My birthday had passed quietly between the forensic report and today. The main hearing felt like a destination I both needed and dreaded. I walked into the courtroom early. Robert was already there with Franklin Reed. He didn't look at me, not once, just stared ahead like I was invisible. Judge Thornton entered. We all stood, then sat. Claire rose. Her presentation was flawless. Your Honor, the evidence will show calculated fraud spanning 18 months. Mr. Mitchell constructed an elaborate network of shell companies and offshore accounts designed to deprive his wife of marital property. She pulled up a timeline on screen. January 14th, 16 months before filing, Mr. Mitchell emails his attorney, I need to keep this property outside the marital estate. This establishes intent. March 14th, 8 weeks before filing, he forms Burwood Holdings, LLC, and transfers the $5 million marital home. May 9th, he files for divorce. Over 18 months, Mr. Mitchell transfers $1.2 million from joint accounts to his own. We've discovered 2 additional shell companies, Coastal Properties, LLC, holding an offshore account with $850,000. Harborview Holdings, LLC, holding a $780,000 Rhode Island condominium Mrs. Mitchell knew nothing about. Claire paused. Finally, Mr. Mitchell purchased a one-way ticket to Costa Rica departing June 24th, 1 week before this hearing, a country with no civil extradition. She submitted the 56-page report, original emails, bank statements, LLC documents, offshore records, the airline reservation. Judge Thornton studied each carefully, asked pointed questions that made Reed shuffle papers nervously. I sat still, hands folded, heart pounding. But I didn't move. When Claire finished, Franklin Reed stood. Your Honor, the January email is out of context. My client discussed legitimate estate planning, not fraudulent concealment. The LLC formations were standard business asset protection. The offshore account represents premarital investment funds. But forensic evidence contradicted everything. Dates didn't match. Money trails led to marital accounts. Timelines showed intent. Judge Thornton's expression remained neutral, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Mr. Reed, I'll hear from your client directly. Call Mr. Mitchell. Robert stood, walked to the witness stand, face tense but projecting confidence. Claire approached, her voice calm, almost gentle. which made her questions more devastating. Mr. Mitchell explained this January email where you state you need to keep property outside the marital estate. Routine legal consultation, discussing options. Options for what? Estate planning. Estate planning that involved hiding assets from your wife. I wasn't hiding anything. Claire pulled up the offshore statement. Explain this Cayman Islands account. $850,000 under Coastal Properties, LLC. Money from an investment before marriage. Forensic analysis shows funds came from your joint checking account, transferred March 2 years ago. Robert's jaw tightened. The analysis is wrong. Is it? What about this Rhode Island property, $780,000? Purchased 14 months before filing. Did you tell your wife? Business investment. With marital funds she knew nothing about. Claire paused. Why did you purchase a one-way ticket to Costa Rica for 1 week before this hearing? Robert hesitated. Planning a vacation, one way, to a country with no extradition, 1 week before facing fraud allegations. Just a vacation. Then why one way? His face reddened, voice rising. I hadn't decided when to return. Claire let that hang, then asked the question that broke him. Why did you transfer your marital home into an LLC 8 weeks before filing for divorce? Robert's face flushed deep red. He gripped the witness stand edge. Because it was mine, he shouted. I built everything. She didn't deserve any of it. Complete silence. Judge Thornton's gavel came down hard. Mr. Mitchell, control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt. Robert realized what he'd done. Sat back breathing hard, face still red. The damage was done. He'd said it. The truth behind the lawyers and shell companies and lies. I stared at him, face flushed sweating, eyes full of rage and fear. This was who he really was, who he'd always been underneath. The hearing continued another hour, but nothing else mattered. Robert's outburst confirmed everything. 4 hours after it began, Judge Thornton called close. I'll issue a written ruling within 3 weeks. This court is adjourned. 3 weeks, 21 days, they would be the longest of my entire life. 22 days after the hearing, my phone rang. Claire's name appeared on the screen. Eleanor, she said. We won. The ruling was 18 pages long. I opened the PDF on my laptop, hands already trembling, and began to read Judge Thornton's words. The January 14th email constitutes clear and convincing evidence of intent to defraud. The defendant explicitly stated his intention to keep this property outside the marital estate more than a year before filing for divorce. This demonstrates premeditation and fraudulent purpose. The formation of Burwood Holdings, LLC on March 14th, precisely 8 weeks prior to filing, further establishes a calculated pattern of asset concealment. The defendant violated his fiduciary duty to his spouse by systematically transferring marital funds to accounts in his sole name, establishing offshore holdings without disclosure, and purchasing property under shell corporations. The court finds that the original ruling of March, issued in the absence of complete evidence, was procured through fraud and material misrepresentation. Therefore, the original judgment is hereby vacated. I stopped reading, had to breathe, then continued. Marital assets shall be redistributed as follows. Eleanor Mitchell is awarded 62% of total marital assets, approximately $3.4 million, including the fair market value of the property at 428 Burwood Lane, the offshore account held under Coastal Properties, LLC, and proportionate interest in the Rhode Island condominium. Robert Mitchell is awarded 38%. Additionally, Victoria Hayes is ordered to pay Eleanor Mitchell $340,000 in damages for her participation in the fraudulent scheme. Finally, this court refers attorney Franklin Reed to the State Bar Disciplinary Board for investigation into potential ethical violations in the representation of his client. I read the ruling twice, then a third time. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd won. After 2 years of fighting, 2 years of sleepless nights and lawyer meetings and Sarah refusing to speak to me, 2 years of being called paranoid and vindictive and greedy, I'd won. I called Ruth. Started sobbing the moment she answered. These weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief, exhaustion, victory, everything I'd been holding inside for so long. You did it, Ellie, Ruth said, crying too. You did it. But when I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant like I'd imagined I would. I just felt tired. Empty. Like I'd been running for miles and finally stopped only to realize I couldn't remember why I'd been running in the first place. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Eleanor. A woman's voice. Familiar, but I couldn't place it. "This is Margaret from Burwood Lane, your old neighbor." My stomach dropped. "Margaret, hi. I'm so sorry to call so early, but I thought you should know." She paused. "Robert, Eleanor, he passed away." The words didn't make sense at first. I sat up in bed gripping the phone. "What?" "Early this morning, I saw the ambulance and police cars. I asked one of the officers. They said it was cardiac. He didn't make it." I thanked her, said something polite, hung up. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, completely still, trying to process what I'd just heard. Robert was gone. The emotions that crashed over me were complex and contradictory. Sadness because despite everything, this was the man I'd spent 48 years with. Anger because he'd left before facing full consequences. Guilt sharp and immediate. Relief, which made the guilt worse. Had the ruling caused this? Had the stress of losing, of being exposed, of facing financial ruin, had that stopped his heart? Had my fight for justice ended his life? Was I responsible? I called Claire, told her. "Eleanor," she said gently, "this isn't your fault. You fought for what was legally and morally yours. His choices led to this outcome. The stress he felt was the result of his own fraudulent actions, not your pursuit of justice." Her words were logical, reasonable, but they didn't ease the gnawing doubt. I called Sarah next, needed to tell her before she heard from someone else. She answered on the third ring. "Sarah, honey, I need to tell you something." I told her as gently as I could. For a moment there was only silence. Then I heard her crying. Deep, wrenching sobs. "Sarah," the line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, listening to silence, and wondered if I'd lost both of them now. My husband to cardiac arrest, my daughter to grief and blame. The funeral would take place 1 week later, and walking into that chapel would be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. I attended Robert's funeral, stood at the very back of the small chapel as far from the front as I could get without being outside. Sarah sat in the first row, her back straight and rigid. She never turned around, not once during the entire service. The funeral was brief, sparsely attended, a handful of Robert's old work colleagues who probably felt obligated to come. Victoria Hayes sat in the far corner, face swollen and red from crying. A few neighbors from Burwood Lane, maybe 20 people total in a chapel built for 100. No one stood to give a eulogy celebrating Robert as a good man. No one spoke about his character or his kindness or how much he'd be missed. The pastor who'd clearly never met Robert read generic scripture and said vague things about eternal rest. Everyone in that room knew what had happened. The court case had been public record, the fraud, the hidden assets, the mistress. There was nothing praiseworthy left to say. After the service ended, people filed out quietly. I waited, letting everyone else leave first. Then I gathered my courage and walked outside looking for Sarah. She was standing by her car, her husband's arm around her shoulders. When she saw me approaching, she stiffened. "Sarah, honey." She turned to face me. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara smudged. "Are you satisfied now, Mom?" Her voice was raw, broken. "He's gone. You won. Are you happy?" "Sarah, I never wanted—" "Just stop." She pulled her car keys from her purse. "I can't do this right now." She got in her car and drove away. Her husband gave me an apologetic look but followed her. I stood alone in the parking lot, autumn wind cutting through my black dress, and felt like I'd lost everything. My husband was gone. My daughter blamed me. And I had millions of dollars that suddenly felt completely meaningless. Over the following months, Robert's estate was administered according to Judge Thornton's ruling. The house on Burwood Lane, our home of 40 years, sold quickly. The market was strong and the property was desirable. Final sale price, $5.2 million. Higher than the original appraisal. I received 62% of the proceeds. Robert's estate received 38%, which would be distributed according to his will. Sarah was his sole heir, which meant most of that money would eventually go to her. Victoria Hayes was explicitly excluded from any inheritance rights. The court's order requiring her to pay $340,000 in damages stood. Her attorney tried to appeal, but it was denied. She paid. The Rhode Island condominium sold for $795,000. The proceeds were divided according to the court's distribution formula. After all settlements, legal fees, taxes, and estate expenses were paid, I received approximately $3.6 million. $3.6 million. It should have felt like security, like vindication, like winning. Instead, it felt hollow, because I couldn't share the relief with my daughter, couldn't explain to her that this had never been about money, that it had been about truth, about refusing to be erased, about fighting back when someone you loved tried to destroy you. But Sarah wasn't speaking to me, and money couldn't fix that. 2 months after the funeral in early September, my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, afraid of more accusations, more anger, more blame. But I picked up. "Mom." Her voice was soft, hesitant, nothing like the cold fury from the parking lot. Can we talk? Please." My hands started shaking. Of course we can talk. "Can we meet tomorrow? Maybe there's something I need to show you." We agreed on a neutral cafe halfway between her house and my apartment. The next afternoon, I arrived early, sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a coffee cup I was too nervous to drink. When Sarah walked in, she looked smaller somehow, tired. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying recently. She sat down across from me, and her hands trembled as she placed them on the table. "Mom," her voice cracked. "I found something in Dad's home office when I was going through his things." She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope, set it on the table between us. "I think you need to see this." Inside that envelope was the final piece of evidence that would reveal the full scope of Robert's manipulation and begin the long journey back to each other. I opened the envelope Sarah had given me. My hands trembled pulling out the documents, the forged evidence, phone records and hotel receipts Robert had used to convince Sarah I'd had an affair, the same fabricated documents she'd shown me months ago. But there was more. Underneath was a printed email chain between Robert and a graphic designer. I read Robert's message dated nearly 2 years ago. "I need these documents edited to look authentic. Phone records showing calls to this number, a number that wasn't mine on these dates. Hotel receipt from Marriott Hartford for March 12th, when I'd been at Ruth's, charged to a credit card ending in these digits. Make it look completely real." The designer's response was brief. "Understood. Ready in 2 days. $500 as discussed." Robert had paid $500 to create fake evidence, had planned it, commissioned it, used it as a weapon through our daughter. I looked up at Sarah. She was crying silently. "Mom," she said, voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I believed him. I said terrible things. I chose his side. I threatened to cut you out completely." I reached across and took her hands. They were cold, shaking. "Sweetheart, you were his victim too. Your father manipulated you expertly." Sarah's face crumpled. "There's more. Something I never told you." She took a shaky breath. "Dad promised me $400,000 if I supported him in the divorce. Jack and I were facing foreclosure. We'd made a bad business investment, drowning in debt. Dad knew. He knew how desperate we were." My chest tightened. Of course Robert had known. He showed me bank statements supposedly proving he had $400,000 set aside for me. He said if I stood by him, that money would save our house, save our family. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "After Dad passed away, I went to that bank. The account number from those statements. There was nothing, Mom. No account. The statements were completely fabricated, like the affair evidence. Everything was a lie." She was sobbing now. "I betrayed you for money that never existed. I accused you of cheating based on forged documents. I told you I'd never speak to you again. What kind of daughter does that—" I couldn't sit across from her anymore. I moved to her side and wrapped my arms around her. She buried her face in my shoulder and cried like when she was small. "The kind of daughter," I said quietly, "whose father spent months manipulating her, who was facing losing her home and was offered a lifeline. You're not the villain, Sarah. You're another one of his victims." We sat like that for a long time. Other customers glanced but didn't interrupt. 2 women crying together, holding each other. Finally, Sarah pulled back and looked at me, mascara running, eyes red and swollen. She looked exhausted and young and heartbroken. "Can you ever forgive me, Mom?" I brushed her hair back from her face the way I'd done 1,000 times growing up. "There's nothing to forgive, but we both need to heal, and that's going to take time." Sarah nodded. "I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll do whatever it takes. I can't lose you, Mom. Not you too." "You won't lose me, I promised. I'm not going anywhere." That day was the first step. Healing didn't happen overnight. We didn't walk out with everything fixed, all pain erased. But slowly, week by week, we began to find our way back to each other. Before we move on, just a quick note, the next part of this story may include a few details that have been slightly adapted for storytelling, so some elements may not perfectly reflect real life. If you've been enjoying this journey, please consider subscribing and sharing the channel so you don't miss future stories like this. And if this kind of content isn't for you, you're always free to stop watching here. Forgiveness didn't come immediately, but every week Sarah and I called each other. Every month we met for coffee or lunch. We talked about small things at first, the weather, her kids, my new apartment. Gradually we worked up to harder conversations. 6 months after that cafe meeting, I made a decision. I needed to leave Connecticut. There were too many painful memories in every street, every building. The courthouse where I'd lost and then won. The apartment I'd rented after leaving our house. Even the coffee shops where I'd met with Claire felt heavy with the weight of those 2 years. I chose Sarasota, Florida. Warm climate, near the ocean, a fresh start. When I told Ruth, she said, "Good for you, Ellie. Sometimes you need to leave the battlefield to truly heal." I bought a small but beautiful house 3 blocks from the beach. 2 bedrooms, bright kitchen space for a garden. It wasn't grand, it wasn't $5 million, but it was mine. Completely, unquestionably mine. The first thing I did was plant a lemon tree in the backyard. Every morning I walked out to that tree, touched its leaves, and reminded myself I survived. I'm still here. I'm still growing. I began volunteering at a local legal aid center for survivors of domestic violence. Not all abuse is physical. Financial manipulation, gaslighting, systematic control, these are forms of violence too. I knew that now in a way I hadn't before. I shared my story in support groups, helped other women navigate divorce, hidden assets, manipulation, taught them what to look for, what questions to ask, how to find a good attorney who specializes in fraud. One woman, 68 years old, going through something remarkably similar to what I'd experienced, came up to me after a session. "You gave me courage to fight," she said. "I was going to accept a $50,000 settlement. Now I'm going after the truth just like you did." Those words made everything worthwhile. The 2 years of battle, the money spent on legal fees, the stress that probably contributed to Robert's cardiac event, the estrangement from Sarah, all of it. If my story could help even one person refuse to be erased, it was worth it. Sarah flew down to visit every 3 months. Her husband Jack came too, and during their second visit, he pulled me aside. "I should have stood up for you, Eleanor," he said. His voice was sincere, pained. "During everything, I was afraid and weak. I'm sorry." I told him what I'd told Sarah. "You were caught in Robert's web too. I don't hold it against you." Gradually, painfully, our relationship rebuilt itself. Sarah and I had long conversations about Robert, about our family, about what had really happened and how we'd both been manipulated in different ways. She shared about her therapy journey, working through guilt and grief, learning to recognize manipulation, understanding how her father had conditioned her since childhood to prioritize his approval above everything else. "I realize now," she told me during one visit, "Dad emotionally manipulated me my whole life, made me think his approval was everything. That's why his lies worked so well." I listened and held her hand and told her I was proud of her for doing the hard work of healing. And then Thanksgiving arrived. 1 year after Robert had passed away. 1 year since that awful funeral where Sarah had asked if I was satisfied. 1 year since I'd stood alone in a parking lot wondering if I'd lost both my husband and my daughter. Sarah called me in early November. "Mom, can we come to you for Thanksgiving? All of us. I want the kids to see your new house. I want us to be together." I said yes before she'd even finished asking. That Thanksgiving Day would show me that healing, real, genuine healing, was truly possible. Thanksgiving Day arrived. 1 year after Robert had passed away. Sarah, Jack, and their 2 children flew to Sarasota to spend the holiday with me. First time I'd hosted a holiday in my new home. First time our family gathered since before the divorce. Sarah and I cooked together in my bright kitchen. Turkey stuffing, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce. We worked side by side, shoulders bumping, smiling at each other. Small moments. They mattered. My grandchildren, Emma, 12, and Lucas, 9, played in the backyard. I watched them through the window, running near the lemon tree, laughter carrying through the open door. They were beautiful. Growing so fast, I'd missed so much time during the worst years. Jack set the table, called out, "Eleanor, where do you want the good dishes?" I laughed, actually laughed about domestic details for the first time in years. Wherever they fit, Jack. It's all good. We sat down to eat. The table was crowded and imperfect and wonderful. Sarah looked at me from across the table, eyes bright. "Mom, can I say something?" I nodded. Her voice shook slightly. "I'm grateful we're here together. A year ago, I thought I'd lost you forever. I thought you were the enemy. I was so wrong." Emma, sitting next to her mother, looked confused. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Sarah smiled through tears. "Because I'm happy, sweetheart. Because Grandma forgave me even when I didn't deserve it." I reached across and squeezed her hand. "You always deserved it, honey, always." After dinner, Sarah and I walked on the beach, sun starting to set, painting sky orange and pink. We walked in silence, listening to waves. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Mom, do you regret it? The legal fight. If you'd taken the $900,000, maybe Dad would still be alive. Maybe we wouldn't have gone through all that pain." I thought carefully before answering. "I don't regret it. Because if I'd accepted that settlement, you would never have known the truth about your father. You would have spent your life thinking I was a cheater, a villain. And I would have spent mine knowing I gave up without fighting for what was right." I looked at the ocean. Did the fight contribute to Robert's passing? Maybe. The stress probably didn't help, but Robert made his choices long before I made mine. He chose to lie, to steal, to manipulate. Those choices have consequences. I turned to face her. "Your father spent over a year planning how to defraud me. He commissioned fake evidence to turn you against me. He hid millions. He was willing to flee the country rather than face what he'd done. Those were his choices, not mine." Sarah was quiet. Then, "You're the strongest person I know, Mom." I smiled sadly. "I'm not strong, Sarah. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference." We both laughed, real laughter from the belly. First real laugh we'd shared in years. As the sun set that evening, I stood on my porch with tea watching my family through the window. Sarah helping Emma with dishes, Jack showing Lucas something on his phone, laughing, talking, being together. I looked at my lemon tree leaves rustling in evening breeze, thought about everything that happened: betrayal, battle, victory, loss, reconciliation. Had it been worth it? Yes, not because of money, not because I won in court, but because I refused to be erased. Because I fought for truth when it would have been easier to accept lies. Because my daughter now knew who her father really was, and we'd found our way back anyway. I'd lost my husband, but I'd kept myself, and I'd regained my daughter. 3 years ago, when Robert told me he didn't love me and handed me divorce papers, I felt like my life was ending. Like I was too old, too tired, too broken to fight back. I was wrong. At 72, I'm happier than I've been in decades. I have my own home, work that matters, a relationship with my daughter that's stronger and more honest than before. And I have peace, real, genuine peace. If you're in the middle of a similar battle, I want you to know you're not alone. Truth wins, but you have to be strong enough or stubborn enough to fight for it. And if you've lost people you love in the process, don't give up. Sometimes forgiveness takes time, but it can happen. Healing is possible. I'm Eleanor. I'm 72. I won my case. I lost my husband. I temporarily lost my daughter, but got her back. I lost the house I lived in 40 years, but gained a new home I love. And I'm still here, still growing, like that lemon tree in my backyard. If my story helps even one person find courage to fight for truth, then sharing it was worth it. Thank you for listening. 2 years have passed since that Thanksgiving, and I'm 74 now. My life has settled into a rhythm I never imagined possible, one that feels less like survival and more like living. The lemon tree in my backyard has grown taller than I am. Last spring, it produced so many lemons I gave bags of them to my neighbors. Ruth, my older sister, still visits every few months. She stays for a couple of weeks at a time, and we spend our mornings on the porch with coffee and crossword puzzles. We laugh about things we couldn't laugh about before our childhood, our mother's stubborn streak that I apparently inherited. The time Ruth drove 3 hours in a snowstorm just to sit with me during the darkest days of the divorce. She doesn't say much about Robert anymore. Neither do I. There's nothing left to say. Sarah calls me twice a week now. We talk about everything: her kids, her job, the new house she and Jack finally bought after years of renting. She's in therapy, and sometimes she shares things she's learning about forgiveness and boundaries and healing. I listen, and I'm proud of her. Not because she chose me in the end, but because she chose herself. That's harder. I still volunteer at the Legal Aid Center downtown. Once a month, I facilitate a support group for women going through high-conflict divorces. I tell my story, not all of it, just the parts that matter, the offshore accounts, the forged evidence. The moment I chose truth over $900,000, some of them cry, some of them nod. One woman about my age came up to me after a session last fall and said, "I was going to accept the settlement tomorrow. I'm not anymore." That moment alone made everything worth it. Last weekend, Sarah drove down with Emma and Lucas. Emma is 14 now, tall, sharp, curious. She asked me about the lemon tree, why I planted it, what it means. I told her it was a reminder that even after something tries to take everything from you, you can still grow something beautiful. Lucas, who's 11 and obsessed with marine biology, spent the afternoon collecting shells on the beach. Jack grilled fish, and Sarah made a salad with lemons from my tree. We ate on the porch as the sun set, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of what I'd lost. I felt the lightness of what I'd gained. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of tea. The air was warm, the ocean was quiet, and the lemon tree swayed gently in the breeze. I thought about Robert, not with anger, not with regret, just with a kind of distant sadness. He made his choices. I made mine. He's gone now, and I'm still here. I thought about the house on Burwood Lane, the one I lost and then fought to reclaim. I'll never live there again, but I don't need to. That house belonged to a version of me that no longer exists. This house, this life, this tree, they belong to the woman I am now. If you're reading this and you're in the middle of your own battle, let me tell you something, it's gonna hurt. You're gonna lose sleep. You're going to cry in courtrooms and question every decision you make. But if you know deep in your bones that the truth matters more than the money or the peace or the approval of people who should have believed you from the start, then fight. Fight hard. Fight smart. And don't stop until you get what's yours. I'm 74 years old. I live alone in a small house in Florida. I have a lemon tree, a sister who visits, a daughter who calls, and 2 grandchildren who think I'm stubborn as hell. They're right, and I wouldn't change a thing. Looking back at everything, the betrayal, the courtroom battles, the sleepless nights. The moment my own daughter stopped speaking to me, I realize now that the hardest part wasn't losing the house or the money. It was losing faith in the people I loved most. And that's a wound that takes years to heal. Don't be like me. Don't ignore the signs when they first appear. I saw the credit card statement. I smelled the unfamiliar perfume. I found the unsigned Christmas card. But I told myself it was nothing, just stress, just age, just my imagination. I wasted 18 months rationalizing what my gut already knew. If I could do it all over again, I'd confront Robert the day I found that card. I'd protect my assets sooner. I'd hire a lawyer before he filed for divorce, not after. But I didn't. I waited. And waiting almost cost me everything. Here's what I learned. The truth is worth fighting for, even when it's expensive, even when it's lonely, even when your own child tells you to stop. I could have taken the $900,000 and walked away. I could have buried the fraud, kept the peace, and pretended Robert was a good man. But I would have spent the rest of my life knowing I'd traded my dignity for convenience. And I'm 74 years old. I don't have time left to live with regrets like that. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I forgave Sarah because she was manipulated, lied to, and desperate. But I didn't forget how it felt when she chose her father over me. That pain lives in me still. Forgiveness just means I don't let it control me anymore. And I learned that God gives us strength we didn't know we had, not to avoid the storm, but to walk through it. There were nights I prayed just to make it to morning. And I did. Every single time. If you're watching this and you see yourself in my story, if you're part of the community that follows family drama stories trying to understand how people survive betrayal, let me tell you, you survive one day at a time. You rebuild one choice at a time. My experience is one of thousands of grandma stories about women who refused to disappear quietly, who chose themselves after decades of choosing everyone else. These family drama stories aren't just entertainment, they're lifelines for people going through similar pain. And these grandma stories prove it's never too late to stand up for yourself. I share my story not for sympathy, but so that others searching through family drama stories and grandma stories online will know they're not alone. We're a generation that was taught to stay silent, to accept our lot, to never make waves. But silence didn't protect me. It nearly destroyed me. So here's my final piece of advice. Trust your instincts. Protect yourself. Fight for the truth. And never ever accept a settlement that buries what really happened. You deserve better than that. Thank you for walking this entire journey with me. I'd love to hear your perspective. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you found yourself in a situation like mine? Would you have accepted the settlement? Or would you have fought for the truth? Your voice matters, and I genuinely want to hear it. If this story resonated with you or made you feel something, please consider subscribing so you won't miss future stories like this one. A quick note. While inspired by real-life circumstances and genuine social issues, certain elements of this narrative have been heightened for storytelling impact. If this particular content doesn't align with your preferences, feel free to explore other videos that might suit you better. Thank you again for being here.